Deep beneath the frozen surface of Alaska, where sunlight barely reaches and the cold can stop a human heart in minutes, there are tunnels carved into solid ice. These tunnels were never meant to be homes. They were built as outposts. Shelters for scientists. Stations for soldiers. Passageways through glaciers older than civilization itself. But ice remembers. It remembers every scream swallowed by the wind. Every body lost to the cold. Every secret buried where no one was supposed to look. Some of these ice tunnel outposts were abandoned suddenly. Supplies left behind. Lights still wired. Doors sealed from the inside. Those who ventured back reported voices echoing through frozen corridors. Footsteps crunching behind them where no one stood. And shapes moving behind walls made of solid ice. Tonight, we descend into the frozen dark. Into the most haunted ice tunnel outposts in Alaska. Places where the cold does not just kill. It keeps. Hello, my dear friend. I am truly glad you are here with me tonight. Because what we are about to explore exists far beyond comfort, warmth, and safety. Alaska is a land of extremes. Here, winter lasts most of the year. Darkness stretches endlessly. And silence presses so hard against the ears that it feels alive. Beneath this frozen wilderness lie ice tunnel outposts built for survival. But survival was not always guaranteed. Some outposts collapsed. Some were evacuated. Some simply went silent. People working in these tunnels reported hearing whispers echo through frozen halls. They saw frost form handprints on walls. They felt unseen presences standing inches away in the dark. And many claimed that the ice itself was watching them. Before we begin, let me ask you something. If you were trapped overnight in an abandoned ice tunnel deep beneath Alaska, and you heard footsteps approaching from the darkness, would you investigate it or would you stay perfectly still and pray the sound passes you by? Tell me what you would do. Now, steady your breath. And follow me into the frozen horror. High in a remote mountain range, buried within a river of ancient ice, lies a place called Frostvale Outpost. It was not built, but carved, a secret military project from a colder era. Engineers used thermal drills and controlled explosives to bore a network of rooms and tunnels deep into the heart of a massive glacier. Its purpose remains classified, a silent sentinel frozen in time. The approach to Frostvale is a journey into a world of blinding white and profound silence. Inside, the world changes. The tunnels are narrow, their walls smoothed by tools but still bearing the marks of their creation. Light from portable lamps casts a cold, brittle glow, causing the ice to shimmer with an internal light. It is perpetually below freezing, a cold that seeps through the thickest insulation. But the cold is not the most notable feature. It is the air. Despite ventilation systems, now silent, the air within Frostvale feels heavy. It is thick, not with humidity, but with pressure, as if the weight of the entire glacier is pressing down, listening. Sound behaves strangely here. And in the deep silences between those echoes, personnel began to hear things. The reports are consistent, logged in official dispatches before the outpost was sealed. Men and women stationed in the labyrinth would hear voices. Not radio static, not the wind, but clear, distinct voices calling their names. The sound seemed to come from the ice itself, from sealed service tunnels or from behind walls marked as solid on the schematics. The voices were familiar, often sounding like a comrade from another section, or even a distant family member. They called with a calm, insistent tone, beckoning the listener to come closer, to check on something. Following the sound always led to a dead end. A blank wall of ancient, impenetrable ice. The decision to abandon Frostvale Outpost was made swiftly. The official reason cited structural concerns and shifting ice. But the personnel were evacuated with a tense urgency. When the final security team made their sweep, they discovered several anomalies. A number of interior doors, heavy vault-like doors designed to seal sections in an emergency, were found locked from the inside. No one was behind them. The rooms were empty, small chambers used for storage or communications. There was no way to lock those doors from within without a person being present. Yet, there they were, secured from the inside, in a facility that was supposed to be empty. A full inventory was conducted. All personnel were accounted for on the transport manifests. But a deep unease settled over the operation. No bodies were ever recovered from Frost Vale, because there were no bodies to find. Everyone had walked out. Yet the evidence suggested someone, or something, had stayed behind to turn those locks. Scientific explanations point to the unique environment. The glacier is alive, shifting and groaning under immense pressure. These stresses could create sounds that mimic human speech, a phenomenon known as pareidolia, where the brain interprets random noise as familiar patterns. The locking doors could have been caused by contracting metal or ice jamming the mechanisms during temperature swings. But those who were there tell a different story in hushed tones. They speak of the ice not as a substance, but as a medium. A glacier is a frozen record of centuries, trapping ancient air, dust, and perhaps imprints of sound within its crystalline structure. Some speculate that the outpost, through its vibrations and human presence, somehow played back these frozen echoes. A more unsettling theory suggests the ice adapted. The constant presence of warmth and sound and thought in that silent, pristine environment was an irritant. The glacier, in its own slow, conscious way, began to mimic the intruders. It studied their isolation. And it called to them, seeking to draw them deeper into itself, to make them permanent parts of the frozen record. The locked doors were not to keep people out, but to seal something in, a gesture made by the outpost itself in a futile attempt at containment. Today, Frostvale Outpost stands empty, its entrance likely swallowed by new snow and advancing ice. The heavy, listening air remains. The narrow tunnels sit in darkness. And somewhere in that deep, blue silence, a voice may still be calling a name, waiting for an answer that will never come from the living, only from the slow, patient creep of the ice. Deep within the polar ice cap, surrounded by 1,000 miles of frozen silence, stands a structure of steel and reinforced polymer. This is White Echo Station, a scientific outpost constructed to study long-term climate patterns in one of the most isolated places on Earth. From the outside, it resembles a cluster of industrial pods, their surfaces perpetually scoured by wind-driven snow. But its true nature is not defined by its purpose or its architecture. It is defined by the ice upon which it sits, and the profound, unnatural relationship between that ice and sound. The station did not earn its name from the whiteness of the landscape. It earned it from the acoustic phenomenon that permeates its every corridor and chamber. Sound here does not behave as it should. In the deep, ancient ice, sound waves travel at different speeds and along unusual paths, trapped and reflected by layers of compacted snow and clear glacial ice that act as a vast, complex lens. The result is not a simple echo. It is something far more disorienting. A sound made inside the station will often return, not as a fading repetition, but as a precise, delayed copy. A single footstep on the grated metal floor, crisp and definitive in the sterile air, will be followed several seconds later by an exact replica of that same footstep, seeming to come from a different direction, or sometimes from directly behind the walker. It is not a ghost of the sound, but a perfect double. A person whispering a note to themselves in the solitude of their quarters might hear that whisper return to them a moment later, with the same intonation and breathiness. The initial reaction among the small crew of researchers and technicians was one of scientific curiosity. They mapped the delays, trying to chart the invisible pathways through the ice and substructure. They theorized about sonic boomerangs, about specific resonant frequencies of the building interacting with the ice sheet. The long polar night descended, bathing the station in months of perpetual twilight. But as the long polar night descended, bathing the station in months of perpetual twilight, the phenomenon began to evolve. Workers reported hearing faint, muddled conversations in empty laboratories. They would enter a room, certain they had overheard colleagues talking, only to find it vacant, the air still and cold. The snippets were never clear enough to understand, just the cadence of dialogue, the rise and fall of questions and answers that belonged to no one present. The station's internal communication system, a simple intercom, would sometimes crackle and carry a brief, distorted fragment of a sentence spoken hours or even days earlier, played back with no sender and no context. The snippets were never clear enough to understand, just the cadence of dialogue, the rise and fall of questions and answers that belonged to no one present. The psychological impact was insidious and cumulative. The certainty of oral reality, the basic trust that a sound heard corresponds to a present event, was systematically dismantled. People began to distrust their own perceptions. They would speak, and wait for their own words to come back to them, a bizarre, involuntary form of auditory feedback. The empty room conversations created a pervasive sense of unseen presence, of a second, invisible crew occupying the same space on a slight delay. The station was no longer a place of research. It had become a hall of acoustic mirrors, each reflection chipping away at the sanity of those trapped within. The breaking point was not a single event, but a series of psychological fractures. A climatologist, renowned for her steady nerves, was found trying to dig into the station's foundation with an ice core sampler, convinced someone was buried and calling for help. A mechanic, hearing the repeated echo of his own hammer blows from a repair hours earlier, became catatonic, believing he was stuck in a time loop. The station's commander began issuing orders to crew members who were not there, responding to questions only he could hear. The decision to evacuate White Echo Station was made via satellite link with the governing Polar Institute. It was deemed a mental health emergency. The crew was extracted, leaving behind their equipment, their research, and most of their personal effects. The official report cited extreme isolation and environmental stress disorder. But every member of that final crew, in their private debriefings, spoke of the echoes. Not as a curiosity, but as an active, intelligent pressure. Today, White Echo Station stands silent and powered down, a dark spot on the endless white. Automated sensors still collect basic external data, but no human has reoccupied it. Acoustics experts have proposed theories to explain the escalating phenomena. They suggest that the station itself, through its daily rhythms of machinery, conversation, and movement, created a vast library of sounds. The unique ice, acting as a natural recording medium with unpredictable playback mechanisms, began to randomly access and rebroadcast this library. The conversations in empty rooms were not ghosts, but sonic memories of the past, leaking back into the present. Yet, this explanation fails to account for the reports of progression, of the echoes seeming to grow more responsive. Or the overwhelming sense of sentience described by the crew. Some speculate that the ice does not just trap sound. It learns patterns. It replicates the most common sounds it hears, the footsteps, the whispers, the fragments of human interaction. And plays them back in a form of mimicry. In this view, White Echo Station was not haunted. It was being studied by its own environment. The ice was listening, learning, and then speaking back in a language made of stolen voices. The station remains, a monument to the fragility of the human mind when confronted with a world that talks back. It is a reminder that silence is not the absence of sound, but a canvas upon which our own noises can be reflected, distorted, and returned to us as something alien and unrecognizable. The polar wind howls outside its empty hull. But inside, there is only the potential for sound, waiting in the cold dark. Waiting, perhaps, for a new footstep to give it something fresh to echo. Far above the Arctic Circle, where the night lasts for months and the cold is a physical presence. This is the domain of the aurora borealis, where curtains of emerald and violet light dance silently across the heavens. Beneath this celestial display, half buried in a permanent snowdrift, are the remains of the Borealis Tunnel Camp. It was established during a peak of scientific optimism, a base for researchers studying the upper atmosphere and the magnificent lights themselves. The camp was abandoned decades ago, its equipment outdated, its funding pulled. But something of its work, it seems, never concluded. Something of its work never concluded. The camp is a series of interconnected modular units, their metal skin scoured by ice crystals, leading into a network of reinforced tunnels dug into the permafrost. The entrance is a dark maw against the white expanse. Inside, the silence is absolute, a thick, frozen quiet that absorbs sound. The generators have been silent for years. The fuel lines are dry. And yet, visitors who brave the journey report that the lights still come on. It begins as a faint, greenish flicker from behind a frosted glass panel in an old lab. Then a console of dead switches will suddenly glow with a weak, amber light, as if receiving a phantom signal. The illumination is never constant. It pulses and fades erratically, mimicking, some say, the rhythm of the auroras that still shimmer in the sky above. No power source can be found. The batteries are corroded husks. It is as if the camp itself is remembering its former purpose, replaying the energy that was once its lifeblood. Deeper within the ice tunnels, another phenomenon occurs. The walls here are not plain dirt, but a spectacular, clear blue ice, formed over centuries. Explorers with headlamps move through these glacial corridors, their light refracting in 1,000 directions. It is in these complex reflections that the figures appear. They are not seen directly, but caught in the periphery, a dark shape mirrored in the wall of ice to your left or right. They appear as silhouettes of people in heavy cold weather gear, standing still, seemingly observing. When you turn your head to look directly, the reflection shows only your own startled face and the empty tunnel behind you. But from a new angle, the dark figure returns, always just out of direct line of sight, a permanent spectator frozen in the ice. The most unsettling reports, however, come from those who attempted to overnight in the camp, seeking shelter from the brutal exterior cold. They speak of the dreams. Not varied nightmares, but a single, shared experience. They dream of being immobile, encased in clear, solid ice. They are fully aware, able to see the tunnel around them, but unable to move a muscle, to draw a breath. They report a sensation of profound cold that seeps into the core of their being, a cold far deeper than the Arctic air. The dream is marked by a feeling of endless, silent observation, as if they are specimens in a glass case. They awaken gasping, their sleeping bags stiff with frost, the inside of the shelter glittering with a rime of ice that was not there when they fell asleep. The official records state the camp was closed for logistical reasons. Yet, persistent rumors suggest the final research team became obsessed with a theory. They postulated that the aurora was not merely a light show, but a form of recording, an imprint of cosmic energy upon the Earth's magnetic field. They believed they could not just observe it, but interact with it. Their experiments, the rumors imply, aimed to tune human consciousness to the frequency of the lights. Whether those experiments succeeded or failed catastrophically is unknown. What remains is a location that seems to have absorbed its own history. The flickering lights may be a residual charge, a geological piezoelectric effect from the shifting ice. The shadows in the walls could be explained by the bizarre properties of light in such dense, ancient ice, creating complex double images. The dreams are a straightforward psychological reaction to extreme cold and isolation. But the Borealis Tunnel Camp invites a more chilling conclusion. Perhaps the researchers did not just study the aurora. Perhaps, in some way, they joined it. Their consciousness, their observations, became entangled with the very phenomenon they sought to understand. The camp is no longer a shelter. It is a receiver, still tuned to a frequency of frozen light and silent, watchful thought. The figures in the ice are not ghosts. They are echoes of perception, trapped in the loop of an endless experiment. To visit is to step inside a machine that is still running. To become a new data point. Observed by the old. And to feel the weight of a cold that seeks not to kill, but to preserve forever. In a state of perfect, silent awareness. Forever. Black ice passage stretches across a remote polar corridor where land narrows and frozen sea presses in from both sides. It is a place marked on navigation charts with caution symbols rather than names. Even from a distance, the ice appears different here. The ice earns its name honestly, while surrounding fields shimmer pale blue or white. Black ice passage remains shaded, almost black, even under full daylight. The surface is smooth in places, fractured in others, with long veins running beneath like frozen currents. Pilots and explorers report that depth is difficult to judge, as if the ice hides its thickness intentionally. Temperature changes here without warning. Instruments may show stable conditions moments before the cold deepens sharply. Breath crystallizes faster. Skin numbs within seconds. Engines strain. These drops do not follow weather patterns or time of day. They arrive suddenly, then fade just as quickly, leaving behind confusion rather than damage. Early expeditions dismissed these reports as equipment failure or miscalculation. Over time, the consistency became impossible to ignore. Different teams, different years, same accounts. Sudden cold. Dark ice. An overwhelming sense of being observed. Visitors describe the feeling clearly. It is not fear at first, but awareness. A sensation that attention is focused, steady and patient. The feeling remains. Every shift of weight echoes faintly through the frozen surface. Others report subtle vibrations traveling outward, as if the ground carries information. At certain angles, shapes become visible below the surface. At first they resemble natural fractures or air pockets. Prolonged observation reveals more structure. Curves where there should be none. Symmetry that does not align with stress patterns. Gradually, faces seem to emerge. Eyes appear sunken, stretched by layers of frozen time. Mouths seem closed, pressed flat by pressure. Expressions are difficult to interpret. Shifting as light changes. The longer one looks, the more defined they seem. No two observers describe the same faces. Some report a sense of familiarity. Others feel nothing but unease. All agree on one detail. The faces appear to be looking outward. Scientists studying the ice have proposed explanations involving trapped sediment, ancient organic matter, or unusual crystalline formations. Samples taken from the passage show nothing outside expected composition. The darkness of the ice is attributed to compressed layers and low albedo minerals carried by ancient flows. These explanations do not address the behavior. During extended stays, people report losing track of time. Watches fall out of sync. Tasks take longer than expected. Communication grows brief and strained. The cold seems to press inward, not just on the body, but on thought itself. One expedition documented a sudden silence. Wind ceased. Equipment noise faded. Even breathing sounded muted. The team stood still, unsure whether sound was being absorbed or whether they were simply listening too hard. When it ended, no one spoke for hours. Several explorers admitted to the same impulse. The urge to kneel and place a hand on the ice. Not out of curiosity, but invitation. Those who resisted described physical discomfort until they stepped away from the passage entirely. No confirmed disappearances have been recorded within Black Ice Passage. This fact is often cited to dismiss the more unsettling stories. Yet logs show numerous aborted missions, sudden route changes, and unexplained equipment losses. Crews leave early. They do not return for extended study. Local guides refuse to cross the passage when possible. Cracks form and seal. Patterns appear and vanish. They say the ice there listens. They say it remembers pressure and presence. At night, under limited polar light, the darkness deepens further. The ice reflects almost nothing. Movement feels risky, even when terrain is known. Headlamps reveal only narrow tunnels of visibility. Beyond that, the ice swallows light whole. Those who have seen faces at night say they appear closer then. Not nearer to the surface, but clearer. As if contrast sharpens their outlines. No one has attempted to mark or extract these formations. The idea alone is enough to end discussion. Black Ice Passage remains open, charted, and technically passable. It is not restricted. It does not break ships or crack beneath weight. It simply endures, unchanged in its effect on those who cross it. People leave with the same conclusion, regardless of background or belief. The passage is not empty. It is not hostile. It is attentive. And attention, in a place that cold and silent, is enough to make even the most experienced traveler turn back. Deep beneath a windswept Arctic plateau lies a facility known as Cold Reach Outpost. Its official purpose, like many remote installations, is veiled in layers of classification. It is a place of steel corridors, humming generators, and low light, built into pre-existing geological formations. But the true mystery of Cold Reach is not found in its laboratories or data centers. It is found in the tunnels. A place of steel corridors, humming generators, and low light, built into pre-existing geological formations. The true mystery of Cold Reach is not found in its laboratories or data centers. It is found in the tunnels. A place of steel corridors, humming generators, and low light, built into pre-existing geological formations. But the true mystery of Cold Reach is not found in its laboratories or data centers. It is found in the tunnels. A place of steel corridors, humming generators, and low light, built into pre-existing geological formations. But the true mystery of Cold Reach is not found in its laboratories or data centers. It is found in the tunnels. A place of steel corridors, humming generators, and low light, built into pre-existing geological formations. But the true mystery of Cold Reach is not found in its laboratories or data centers. It is found in the tunnels. A place of steel corridors, humming generators, and low light, built into pre-existing geological formations. But the true mystery of Cold Reach is not found in its laboratories or data centers. It is found in the tunnels. These service and utility tunnels stretch out from the main hub like the roots of some vast, metal tree. Survey teams equipped with laser measuring devices and detailed blueprints will follow a corridor to its documented end. Only to find it continues. A new branch will appear where the schematics show solid rock. It is as if the outpost is slowly, incrementally, growing in the dark. Because of this, people get lost with a frequency that cannot be explained by simple human error. Even experienced personnel, following standard safety protocols, report taking a familiar turn and finding themselves in an entirely unfamiliar passage. The lighting strips, usually a consistent guide, will flicker or fail in these sections. The painted directional markings on the walls seem to fade. A profound sense of disorientation sets in, a feeling that the very geometry of the space is shifting around you. This disorientation is compounded by a complete communications blackout. Radios, even hardened military-grade sets, stop working in these deeper sections. Not with static, but with a dead, hollow silence. Personal locator beacons fail to transmit. The sound of your own breath and the distant, dripping water for company. But you are not alone. This is the consistent report from those who have wandered too far and managed, often by pure luck, to find their way back. After the disorientation, after the radio silence, comes the sound. It is the sound of breathing. Not their own. It is a slow, steady, moist inhalation and exhalation, heard directly behind them, as if someone is standing mere inches from their back. The air feels warm on the nape of the neck. To turn around is to see an empty tunnel, stretching back into the darkness from which they came. The sound stops instantly. But the moment they turn back to continue their journey, the footsteps resume. And shortly after, the breathing begins again. It is a silent follower that only makes itself known through sound and sensation. A persistent, intimate shadow that never shows itself. Scientific assessments are, of course, skeptical. They suggest the extended tunnels are the result of incomplete original surveys, or perhaps natural fissures. Or perhaps natural fissures that have been unconsciously incorporated into the outpost's layout over time. The disorientation could be a form of sensory deprivation, exacerbated by low oxygen or subtle infrasound generated by shifting rock. Exacerbated by low oxygen or subtle infrasound generated by shifting rock. The radio failure is easily attributed to mineral deposits in the bedrock blocking signals. The breathing, they say, is a classic auditory hallucination, the brain manufacturing sound in a silent, high-stress environment. Yet, the personnel of Cold Reach have developed their own understanding. They speak of the mountain itself. The theory is that Cold Reach was built into something that was already inhabited. Not by creatures, but by a presence. A consciousness of stone and pressure and deep time. The outpost, with its lights and noise and human warmth, is an irritant. The presence is not hostile, but curious. It studies the intruders by getting close. It maps them by letting them get lost. The extended tunnels are not construction errors, but the mountain slowly, patiently, enveloping the foreign object within itself. The breathing is its way of listening. Of understanding the rhythm of this strange, soft life. That has tunneled into its core. It is the sound of the earth taking a measured interest. Protocol at Cold Reach is strict. No one travels the deep tunnels alone. All excursions are timed and tracked with physical line markers, as technology cannot be trusted. There is an unspoken rule among the crew. If you hear the breathing, you do not turn around. You keep walking, and you speak calmly, describing what you see aloud, as if giving a report to the empty air. It is a gesture of acknowledgement. A way of saying, we know you are there. The Cold Reach outpost continues its classified work, a bubble of human endeavor in an ancient, indifferent landscape. The generators hum. The lights flicker. And in the darkness beyond the last known bulkhead, the tunnels stretch on, farther than any map will ever show, a silent, breathing maze waiting for the next lost soul to wander just a little too deep. Silent Fong Station sits on a high glacial ridge, a spear point of human ambition driven into the heart of the ice. For 3 years, its small crew sent daily data streams, reports of barometric pressure and temperature gradients, a steady digital heartbeat from the roof of the world. Then, the great blizzard came. A storm of legendary ferocity that painted the world white and swallowed all sound. When the skies finally cleared and communications remained dead, a rescue mission was launched. What they found has become a cornerstone of polar mystery. The station was structurally intact, its exterior lights dark. its antennae heavy with rime ice, forcing the main airlock. The rescue team entered a scene of suspended animation. The air was cold, but not the killing cold of a total power failure. Emergency lights cast a dim, blue glow over the communal habitat. And there, on the central dining table, were the meals. They were half-eaten. Bowls of reheated stew with spoons still resting in them. Mugs of tea, long since frozen solid. It was as if the entire crew had simply paused mid-bite. And never resumed. Moving through the connected modules, the rescuers documented a state of subtle disarray. Chairs were overturned, not in a pattern of violent struggle, but as if someone had risen quickly, the chair tipping behind them. A single chair lay on its side in the recreation area, another near a bank of computer monitors. In the sleeping quarters, bunks were unmade, personal items like books and datapads were left open on pillows. There was no violence, no splintered furniture or signs of conflict. Only this quiet, pervasive evidence of interruption. The most chilling discovery was in the station's lower utility level. A tunnel carved directly into the glacial ice that housed storage and the water recycling system. The walls here, smoothed by engineering tools when the station was built, were marred. Long, frantic scratches ran across the ice. They were not the marks of tools. They were gouges, clustered at about shoulder height. As if made by human fingers or the desperate scrabble of gloves. The patterning was dense, covering entire sections of wall. And they originated from the inside. Whatever made them was trapped within the corridor, trying to claw its way out through solid ice. The main door to this level was found unlocked and unobstructed. The absence was the heaviest fact of all. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no evidence of fire or system failure. Its logs showed a gradual, manual shutdown of non-essential systems just before the storm peaked, the act of a calm crew battening down the hatches. The last exterior camera images showed only a wall of white. The final audio log was a routine weather update, the voice steady, giving no indication of distress. Then, silence. The official inquest yielded no answers. It ruled out environmental catastrophe, mechanical failure, and human conflict. The food was tested and found uncontaminated. There was no evidence of a sudden atmospheric leak or sickness. The crew of 8 highly trained individuals, equipped for extreme isolation, had vanished into the heart of the storm, leaving behind a perfectly preserved snapshot of their interrupted lives. This has led to a bifurcation of theories, each more unsettling than the last. The first is psychological, a case of collective environmental panic. Proponents suggest that the sheer sensory deprivation of the blizzard, the weeks of prior isolation, and the primal fear of the storm's fury triggered a shared psychotic episode. In this scenario, the crew, as a unit, experienced a catastrophic break from reality. They may have fled the station together, succumbing to the storm in a state of shared delusion. The scratches in the ice could be a later artifact, made by a single individual who returned alone, confused, and trapped themselves in the lower level. The second theory is more physical, yet just as enigmatic. Silent Fawn was built on a particularly active part of the glacier. Seismologists note that certain frequencies of infrasound, generated by the storm winds interacting with the ridge or by deep ice movements, are inaudible to humans but can induce intense feelings of dread, paranoia, and even visual hallucinations. The crew may have been subjected to an acoustic weapon they could not hear. They would have felt an escalating, unexplainable terror, a unanimous urge to abandon a perceived threat that had no physical form. The scratches are not attempts to escape, but the futile reaction of a mind under unbearable neurological stress. But a third, quieter suggestion persists, often mentioned in hushed tones by those who have spent long seasons on the ice. It is the idea of the landscape itself asserting a kind of ownership. The ice is not a passive substance. It moves, it creaks, it holds pressures and ancient atmospheres. Perhaps the storm, of such monumental power, did not just bring snow and wind. Perhaps it brought a change in pressure so profound it allowed the ice to speak, or to emit something forgotten. The crew did not flee in panic, but were called away by something that mimicked safety, or simply absorbed them into the white. The scratches are not marks of fear, but of a last, failed attempt to communicate from one state of being to another. Silent Fong Station still stands, though it has been stripped of its equipment and sealed. It is a white tomb on a white plain, a monument to a vanishing. The mystery endures because it offers no villain, no monster, no clear moment of disaster. It presents only an interruption, a pause button pressed during a blizzard, never to be released. The meals remain half-eaten in the minds of those who study the case. The chairs are forever overturned. And the ice walls, somewhere beneath fresh layers of wind-blown snow, still hold those silent, frantic scratches, a language of panic with no translator, etched from the inside out. Carved into the side of a remote mountain range, hidden from casual view, lies an entrance known locally as the Blue Maw. It is a tunnel complex of unknown origin. There are no historical records of its construction, no permits, no mining claims. It simply exists, a man-made labyrinth delving deep into the heart of the stone. The tunnels are perfectly circular, smoothed as if by a great heat, their surfaces unnaturally uniform. And they glow. It is a faint, cerulean bioluminescence that emanates from the rock itself, providing just enough light to see the path ahead and the endless, curving walls that recede into the earth. The light is the first mystery. The second is the sound. But it is not silent. Faintly, from shafts that descend into absolute blackness or from around distant bends, the echoes come. They are not the drips of water or the groans of shifting rock. They are voices. They murmur in a cadence that suggests language, with rhythms and inflections that feel intelligent, but the words are unrecognizable. They are not any known tongue, ancient or modern. The sound is conversational, sometimes a single speaker, sometimes what seems like a discussion between several entities. It is never loud enough to understand, only to perceive. It is the sound of a dialogue you are not meant to follow. This combination of the unearthly blue glow and the whispering echo Isa has a documented psychological effect on those who spend time within the tunnels. Workers hired to map the system, or researchers taking geological samples, all report a similar, gradual sensation. It begins as a quiet curiosity about what lies around the next curve. Then it becomes a subtle pull, a feeling that the answer to the murmuring is just a little further in. The perfectly smooth walls seem to guide you forward. The cool blue light feels inviting. The voices, though foreign, sound like an invitation. This intellectual curiosity slowly, insidiously, transforms into a compulsion. It is at this point that individuals have historically made a fatal decision. They dismiss the calls of their colleagues. They cite a need to check a side passage or to get a better audio recording of the voices. They walk alone into one of the many branching channels, their form swallowed by the blue gloom. And they do not return. Searches are conducted, calls echo through the vast tunnels, but no answer comes. The smooth walls offer no clues, no scrap of fabric, no footprint. The person is simply absorbed by the blue maw, vanishing without a trace as if they had never been there at all. What are these tunnels? Geologists are baffled by the luminescent mineralogy, suggesting it could be a unique phosphorescent bacterium or a radioactive or emitting Cherenkov light. Acoustics experts propose that wind through specific, flute-like fissures could generate the illusion of speech. Psychologists point to sensory deprivation and the power of suggestion in triggering a dissociative state, leading people to wander off and become lost. Yet, the nature of the compulsion remains the darkest puzzle. It is not reported as fear or panic, but as a calm, irresistible draw. This has led to a more unsettling theory. The Blue Maw tunnels are not a place. The glow is not illumination, but a lure. The voices are not an echo of the past, but a broadcast. The purpose is not to house something, but to collect. The smooth, featureless walls offer no distraction, focusing the mind solely on the light and the sound. Gradually rewiring a person's sense of self-preservation into a need to seek the origin. Those who vanish are not victims of a collapse or a hidden crevice. They are individuals who followed the call to its logical, and terminal, conclusion. Today, the entrance is sealed with a heavy steel gate. Though the faint blue light can still be seen gleaming from the cracks. The Blue Maw tunnels remain, a silent, glowing enigma in the mountain. They ask a question in a language we cannot decipher. They offer a path in a light that provides no warmth. And they stand as a monument to a very particular kind of terror. Not of something that chases you, but of something that calls to you with a quiet, reasonable, and utterly persuasive voice. Promising answers from the deep, eternal dark. Permafrost Gate sits at the edge of a frozen plateau where the ground has never fully thawed. The outpost was constructed decades ago as a research and monitoring station, anchored deep into ice that had remained stable for thousands of years. The location was chosen for isolation. No settlements lie nearby. Supply routes are limited and seasonal. Weather shifts quickly, often grounding transport for weeks at a time. The silence here is profound, broken only by wind scraping across ice and metal. Official records show that the outpost was active for only a short period. Its stated purpose involved geological surveys and climate observation. Teams rotated through on tight schedules. Reports from the early years are routine, technical, and uneventful. Then the language changes. Later documents reference a tunnel excavated beneath the outpost, extending into permanently frozen ground. The tunnel was restricted, accessible only to select personnel. Details are sparse. Measurements are incomplete. Several pages are missing entirely. What is clear is that something was discovered beyond that tunnel. Within a single month, all activity ceased. Equipment was abandoned. Power systems were shut down in a controlled sequence. Most telling of all, the tunnel entrance was sealed deliberately, not collapsed or lost, but closed behind layers of reinforced barriers designed to endure extreme pressure and time. The gate remains. It stands within a buried access chamber, reachable only through a narrow descent shaft. Thick ice coats the walls, trapping every sound. The gate itself is smooth and featureless, set flush against frozen stone. No markings explain its purpose. No warnings are posted. Those who approach the gate report the same sensations. The fear comes first, sudden and intense. It does not build gradually. One moment the chamber feels cold and quiet. The next, the body reacts as if to immediate danger. Heart rate spikes. Breathing becomes shallow. Muscles tense without instruction. Alongside the fear is pressure. A tightness behind the eyes. A dull force pressing inward, as though depth itself is closing in. Some compare it to rapid altitude change. Others describe it as weight applied directly to thought. Yet no one has remained near the gate for long. Even trained personnel retreat within minutes, citing an overwhelming need to leave. Several attempts were made to document the effect. Cameras placed facing the gate malfunctioned after activation. Audio recordings captured only low-frequency hums that vanished upon playback. Sensors positioned near the seal returned inconsistent data, fluctuating without pattern. What lies beyond the gate is unknown. Records mention a discovery, but never describe it. No images remain. No samples are logged. A final report notes that continuation was deemed unacceptable under any circumstances. The phrasing is precise and final, suggesting a decision made under extreme certainty. Some speculate that the tunnel breached an ancient void within the permafrost, a space untouched by surface conditions. Others believe it exposed a structure, natural or otherwise, preserved by cold beyond normal understanding. None of these theories appear in official documentation. The personnel assigned to Permafrost Gate were relocated quietly. No interviews were conducted. Career records show abrupt transfers and early retirements. Several individuals withdrew entirely from fieldwork. One journal recovered years later contains only brief entries near the end, focused on sleep disturbances and persistent headaches. Local guides refuse to approach the site. They say the ground near the outpost feels wrong, brittle in a way ice should not be. They report hearing vibrations beneath their feet, too subtle to be called sound. When asked about the gate, they change the subject or leave. Environmental readings around Permafrost Gate show anomalies that defy easy explanation. Ice growth patterns near the sealed tunnel differ from surrounding areas. Fractures form and reseal without temperature shifts. Snow accumulation behaves unevenly, avoiding certain sections of ground entirely. At night, the outpost appears darker than it should. Light from the sky seems muted, as if absorbed rather than reflected. Shadows remain fixed longer than expected. Time feels stretched, minutes passing slowly without clear cause. No attempts have been made to reopen the gate. The barriers show no sign of failure. They were designed to last, and they have. Even proposals for remote drilling or non-invasive scanning were denied. Whatever was found beyond the tunnel is considered better left undisturbed. Those who stand near the gate often describe a final sensation before retreating. A sense of being noticed. Not watched in a physical sense, but acknowledged. As if proximity itself triggers recognition. Symptoms fade quickly with distance. Fear dissolves. Pressure lifts. Thoughts clear. The contrast is stark enough to leave lasting impressions. The outpost exists in records and satellite images, but rarely in conversation. Wind erases tracks within hours. The permafrost gate remains sealed, silent, and maintained only by the cold itself. It stands as a boundary, not just in space, but in decision. A place where exploration ended not because of danger alone, but because of certainty. Whatever lies beyond the gate does not need to move or signal. Its presence was enough. And so the ice remains unbroken, holding its secret beneath layers of frozen time, waiting without urgency, knowing the seal will not be challenged again. Deep in a remote, snow-blasted valley, surrounded by silent peaks, stands the Cryashade facility. Its architecture is stark and functional, a series of interconnected blocks with few windows, designed to withstand the brutal climate. For decades, it served as a research station, its true purpose obscured by layers of bureaucratic classification. Public records only state it housed experimental equipment, a vague term covering a multitude of possibilities in fields like materials testing, atmospheric study, or energy research. The facility was officially decommissioned years ago. The power was cut, the staff relocated, and the heavy blast doors sealed. Yet, a small contingent of private security maintains a perimeter watch, ensuring the site remains undisturbed. It is these guards who first reported the anomalies, experiences so consistent they became part of the facility's unofficial legend. The phenomenon occurs only at night, during the long, polar darkness. Patrols making their rounds will sometimes see a figure. It stands perfectly motionless, facing a wall, or a closed door, or simply staring down the length of a hallway. They do not radiate light, but seem to absorb it, appearing as darker voids against the dim emergency lighting. Patrols making their rounds through the facility's vast, empty corridors will sometimes see a figure. The protocol is to call out, to identify the intruder. But the figures never respond. When a guard gathers the courage to approach, the figure does not flee. Instead, it dissolves. It shatters into a cloud of fine, glittering frost that hangs in the air for a moment before dissipating completely. No moisture is left on the floor. No chill remains in the air beyond the existing cold. It is a vanishing act of ice and shadow. The most compelling evidence, however, comes from the automated systems. Even after the main power shutdown, a bank of security cameras, powered by independent backup cells, continued to record on a motion-activated loop. The footage, reviewed months later during a routine data retrieval, showed movement. Long, silent stretches of empty corridor would suddenly trigger the recording. And in the grainy, monochrome video, shapes would drift past. Not walking, but gliding. They would pause at intersections, as if considering a direction, or stand for hours before a particular door or panel. These recordings confirmed what the guards had seen, and added a new layer of mystery. Engineers and skeptics have proposed rational theories. The figures could be a complex interplay of shadow and light from the moon on the snow outside, projected through the few high windows. The frost could be explained by microclimates within the building, pockets of supercooled air condensing into brief, man-shaped clouds. The security footage glitches could be attributed to failing batteries and corrupted data streams creating phantom images. But those who have spent a night shift within Cryashade speak of a different quality. The cold inside feels intelligent. It is not merely the absence of heat, but a presence that observes. The experimental equipment, they speculate, was not studying the cold. It was being studied by it. Perhaps the experiments involved pushing materials or energy states to absolute zero, tapping into a realm where physics behaves differently. In doing so, they may have created an imprint, or invited something in that thrives in that profound stillness. The figures are not ghosts of people, but echoes of the experiments themselves. Patterns of energy or information that coalesce in the dark. Echoes of the experiments themselves. But echoes of the experiments themselves, patterns of energy or information. Patterns of energy or information that coalesce in the dark. Another theory suggests the facility itself achieved a kind of awareness. The endless cycles of heating and cooling. The hum of generators and the silence that followed. Perhaps created a resonant pattern in the very structure. Now, in its dormant state, it replays fragments of its own operational memory. The figures are not intruders, but standing records of past moments, frozen data points manifesting in the physical world. The Cryashade facility remains sealed, a silent monument on the white plain. The perimeter guards still walk their routes, their breath pluming in the air. They try not to look too long down the dark corridors. And in the deepest hours of the night, when the wind dies and the world holds its breath, the empty halls are not truly empty. They are occupied by silent sentinels of frost. Patient and motionless, watching over the dormant machinery. Waiting perhaps for the experiments to begin anew. Or simply standing guard over the deep, enduring cold that they now call home. Nestled in the shadow of a towering, active Serac field was a facility known as Icefall Watch. Its purpose was purely scientific, a daring project to study the internal dynamics of a living glacier from within. Engineers had bored a vertical shaft down through hundreds of feet of ancient, compacted snow and ice. Then constructed a series of observation decks and laboratories like a suspended treehouse inside the glacier itself. It was a masterpiece of polar engineering, but it was built on a fundamental principle of instability. The entire glacier was in a slow, perpetual state of collapse, calving house-sized blocks of ice into the valley below. And the station was designed to move to flex to groan with its massive host. To move to flex to groan with its massive host. The sound was the first thing noted in every crew journal. A constant, deep-throated creaking, like the timbers of an old sailing ship in a heavy sea. It was the sound of millions of tons of ice under unimaginable pressure, shifting by increments against itself and against the station's reinforced superstructure. The noise was not occasional. It was the station's permanent soundtrack, a bass note of geologic stress that vibrated through the floors and up into the bones of the inhabitants. It was a reminder that they were not in a building on solid ground, but guests within a frozen river, and the river was flowing. Beyond this ever-present groan, other sounds began to manifest. Workers reported distinct, localized pounding. It would come from above, a solid thud against the ceiling of an upper deck, as if a large block of ice had been dropped onto the outer hull. Sensors on the exterior would show no impact, no new seismic event. Minutes or hours later, the same definitive thump would resonate from below, shuddering up through the grid flooring, as if something had struck the station's deepest pilings from beneath. These were not the diffuse creaks of moving ice. They were percussive, deliberate impacts, isolated and sharp. It was the third category of sound that pushed the experience from unnerving into the realm of the deeply uncanny. Personnel stationed on the mid-level decks, those surrounded entirely by the blue, translucent walls of the glacier, began to report a new phenomenon. The sound would start as a faint, rhythmic tap, like a knuckle rapping against a thick pane of glass. Then it would grow in strength and definition, becoming a solid, resonant knock. It seemed to move, traveling along the corridor of ice outside the viewing port. Sometimes pausing directly opposite a window before continuing on its path. The implication was inescapable, and voiced in hushed tones during crew briefings. Something was inside the million-year-old ice. And it was knocking. The official explanations from the project's geophysicists were thorough, and logically sound. The pounding from above and below, they argued, was the result of hydrofracturing. Meltwater, flowing in hidden channels through the glacier, would occasionally become trapped and pressurized. When the pressure exceeded the strength of the ice, it would explode outward in a sudden, localized burst. This violent release of energy could certainly sound like a massive blow to the station's infrastructure. The lateral knocking, they proposed, was an auditory illusion. A hydrofracture event hundreds of meters away, or even the simple shearing of one ice layer against another, could be channeled through a specific vein of clearer ice, making it seem as if the source was moving right past the window. Yet, for the individuals experiencing these events, the scientific explanations felt incomplete. The knocking from within the ice had a cadence that felt patterned, not random. Crew members who dared to press a hand against the cold composite wall during the knocking claimed they could feel a sympathetic vibration, a subtle answering pulse through the material. The timing was also peculiar. The phenomena increased in frequency during the long polar night, when the crew was most isolated, and seemed to diminish during the summer melt season, when the glacier was noisier with surface water. This led to a more speculative line of thought, one that considered the nature of the ice itself. A glacier is not a monolithic block. It is an archive, trapping ancient air, volcanic ash, biological material, and immense pressure from the weight of millennia. Perhaps, the theory goes, the sounds were not caused by something moving through the ice, but by the ice itself undergoing a form of release. The intense pressures could create pockets of gas or fluid that, when suddenly mobilized, would seek a path of least resistance, creating shockwaves that traveled in seemingly intelligent ways. The knocking would then be a kind of glacial communication, a language of stress and fracture, misinterpreted by human brains as something intentional. Icefall Watch was decommissioned not because of a catastrophe, but because of the unsustainable psychological toll on its rotating crews. The constant auditory assault, the feeling of being inside a giant that was constantly stirring in its sleep, proved too much for long-term study. The station was sealed and the access shaft allowed to fill with snow. Today, the Serac field continues its slow march forward. The station, if it still holds together, is now fully encased, a tiny, dark cavity within the flowing ice. A tiny, dark cavity within the flowing ice. The pounding and the knocking have no human audience anymore. But the scientists who worked there still remember the specific quality of those sounds. They remember the way the creaking would suddenly stop, leaving a vacuum of silence, just before a single, solid knock would echo through the halls. Just before a single, solid knock would echo through the halls. It was in those silences that the most profound fear took root. It was the fear that the ice was not just settling. It was the fear that it was listening, and that the knocks were not a symptom of chaos, but a response. High in a range of snow-capped peaks, nestled in a cradle of eternal winter, lies a glacier unlike any other. It is known as Hollow Glacier Station, a name born from both its structure and a long-abandoned research outpost perched on its edge. The glacier itself is a river of ancient, compressed ice, but its interior is not solid. Centuries of unique melt patterns, hidden streams, and geological quirks have carved vast, cavernous spaces within it. It is less a solid mass and more a frozen, crystalline labyrinth, a cathedral of blue ice with a hollow heart. The silence on the surface is profound, broken only by the wind. But descend into one of the many fissures or cavern entrances, and you enter a world defined by sound. The acoustics within the hollow glacier are unnatural. A single footfall, the crunch of ice under a boot, does not fade. It travels. It echoes down unseen corridors, bounces off distant, smooth walls, and returns from multiple directions at once. Layered and complex. A whisper can become a chorus. A dropped tool can sound like a cascade of falling stone. In this environment, sound loses its origin. It becomes a property of the ice itself, moving through the frozen veins of the glacier, with a life of its own, moving through the frozen veins of the glacier, with a life of its own, moving through the frozen veins of the glacier, with a life of its own, moving through the frozen veins of the glacier, with a life of its own, moving through the frozen veins of the glacier, with a life. This phenomenon becomes deeply personal for anyone who speaks within the chambers. You might call out to a companion to watch their step. Seconds later, your own voice returns to you. But it is changed. It may come from behind you, though you face forward. It may sound slower, deeper, or oddly stretched. It is your words, your vocal pattern, but it feels detached, as if the glacier has taken your voice, examined it, and is now playing it back with subtle, unsettling alterations. It feels less like an echo and more like a reply. This is where the reports become truly strange. Researchers and mountaineers who have spent nights camped within the more stable outer caverns tell of hearing voices when no one is speaking. They do not form clear words, but they carry the cadence of conversation, the rise and fall of questions and statements. Some have sworn they hear fragments of their own native language, or the distant sound of laughter. Most chilling are the accounts of the ice mimicking specific speech. A person might mutter to themselves about being cold. Minutes later, from deep within a glacial tunnel, a slow, clear, and perfectly mimicked repetition of that phrase drifts back to them, the tone empty and flat. The abandoned station itself adds to lack of funding, but because of the psychological impact on the team. Logs describe increasing paranoia, arguments over who was whispering in the adjacent room when all were accounted for, and a pervasive feeling of being discussed by the very walls that surrounded them. The final entry is succinct. It states the environment is incompatible with sustained human sanity. Geophysicists have theories. The hollow, resonant chambers could function like a giant, frozen recording studio. They suggest that sounds from decades past, the conversations of the original research team, or even the cries of ancient winds, could be trapped in specific ice formations, released slowly as the ice subtly shifts and melts. The mimicry could be an extraordinary example of audio pareidolia, where the complex, decaying echoes of one's own voice are misinterpreted by a stressed brain as speech. But another possibility lingers, one as clear and cold as the ice itself. What if the hollow glacier is not just a recorder, but a learner? A vast, non-conscious system that absorbs the sonic vibrations of those who enter it. The echoes are not mere reflections. They are the glacier practicing. Over years, over decades, it has absorbed fragments of language, tones of voice, patterns of human sound. The voices people hear are not ghosts of the past. They are the glacier's own attempts to use the vocabulary it has collected, playing it back through the infinite, resonating chambers of its hollow body. Hollow Glacier Station stands silent under the alpine stars. The wind howls across its surface, a sound that does not penetrate the deep blue chambers below. Within those chambers, the air is still and the cold is absolute. And in that perfect, frozen silence, something stirs. Not a creature, but a resonance. A memory of sound given new shape. To speak there is to have your words become part of the glacier's library. To listen is to hear the ice itself thinking, in a slow, patient, and chillingly familiar voice. In a slow, patient, and chillingly familiar voice. Wintervale Bunker was built into a granite ridge far above the tree line, where snow settles early and never fully leaves. It was designed as a survival facility, a place meant to endure catastrophe and shelter life against extreme cold. From the outside, it appears solid and dependable. Thick blast doors. A structure made to resist time itself. Construction records describe careful planning. Insulated corridors. Redundant power systems. Heat circulation designed to maintain stable interior temperatures regardless of conditions outside. On paper, Wintervale was flawless. A bunker meant to preserve warmth, strength, and clarity when the world above could not. Yet from the moment it became operational, something felt wrong. Technicians reported that interior temperatures were consistently lower than readings outside the bunker. Even during mild winters, sensors deep within the tunnels showed drops that exceeded environmental expectations. Heating systems functioned correctly. Insulation held. Still, the cold persisted. At first, this was treated as calibration error. Instruments were replaced. Data logs were reviewed. Nothing explained why the bunker seemed to draw cold inward rather than keep it out. Then came the exhaustion. Visitors entering Wintervale often felt drained within minutes. Not shortness of breath or dizziness, but a deep and sudden fatigue. Muscles weakened. Thoughts slowed. Simple tasks required effort. The sensation was not tied to exertion or altitude. It arrived quietly and settled heavily. Teams shortened their inspections. Rest breaks became frequent. Some workers described the urge to sit down and remain still, as if movement itself was unnecessary. Once outside, the fatigue lifted quickly, leaving behind confusion and concern. The most disturbing reports involved the tunnels. Wintervale extends farther into the mountain than surface maps suggest. Long corridors stretch beyond main chambers, carved straight and narrow. Lighting is even and consistent, eliminating deep shadows. Yet many visitors reported seeing figures. They appeared at the far end of tunnels, standing upright and motionless. Human in outline, but indistinct in detail. No facial features. No visible movement. Just presence. Always distant. Always watching. They simply stood, occupying space where no one should be. Cameras installed to monitor the tunnels showed nothing. Footage revealed empty corridors, perfectly still. Motion sensors remained inactive. Thermal imaging showed only cold stone and air. Despite this, reports continued. One engineer described counting steps toward a figure that never changed size. Another reported feeling watched even after the figure vanished. Several refused to re-enter certain sections, unable to explain why. As investigations continued, the interior temperature continued to drop. Areas far from entrances measured colder than exterior snowfields. Frost formed on interior walls, creeping along seams and joints. Breath fogged in places meant to be climate-controlled. Heating units ran constantly, yet achieved little. Official reasoning cited inefficiency and maintenance concerns. No public mention was made of exhaustion or sightings. Access was restricted. Power was shut down in stages. The bunker was sealed but not destroyed. Years later, independent explorers began to visit. They entered cautiously, equipped with modern gear and recording devices. The cold greeted them immediately. Within minutes, breath thickened. Hands stiffened despite insulation. The same fatigue followed, heavy and unrelenting. Some explorers pushed deeper, driven by curiosity. They reported the tunnels felt longer than expected. Sound behaved strangely, footsteps echoing unevenly or not at all. Time seemed difficult to track. Watches disagreed. Conversations slowed. And then, the figures appeared again. Always at a distance. Always silent. Standing where corridors met darkness. Some explorers claimed the figures matched their own height. Others felt the shapes mirrored posture and stance, as if reflecting rather than approaching. One group described the overwhelming need to stop walking when the figures were visible. Another reported sudden certainty that continuing forward was a mistake, though no clear danger was present. No one has ever made contact. Those who turn back describe a strong sense of relief upon leaving the tunnel network. Warmth returns quickly. Energy floods back into limbs. The contrast is so sharp it feels unreal. Studies of the bunker environment offer few answers. Rock composition shows no unusual radiation. Air quality remains stable. Magnetic fields are normal. Structural integrity is intact. There is nothing measurable that explains the physical or psychological effects. Local residents avoid the ridge entirely. They say the mountain holds cold differently there. They say it keeps what enters too long. When asked about Wintervale, they describe it as a place that forgets warmth and teaches stillness. The melt patterns avoid the ridge even during warmer seasons. Those who enter do so briefly. No one stays long. The fatigue insists on retreat. The tunnels offer silent reminders that something remains inside. The figures do not chase. They do not block exits. They do not demand attention. They simply stand at the ends of passageways, unmoving, as if waiting for someone to stop walking. Wintervale was meant to preserve life. Instead, it became a place where warmth fades, strength drains away, and stillness waits patiently in the dark. And the mountain keeps its silence. At the very edge of the mapped world, where the ice sheet stretches to meet a perpetually gray sky, stands a lonely silhouette. This is the Frostbound Relay. It was built during a time of polar expansion. A critical communication node designed to bridge vast, empty distances. Its towering lattice of steel and its powerful dish antenna were meant to pierce the auroras and solar winds. To keep the far-flung outposts of humanity connected. But from the very beginning, the Frostbound Relay failed. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in a slow, persistent erosion of function. The signals it transmitted became garbled. Voices from distant stations would cut in and out, swallowed by waves of intense, hissing static. Repairs were constant. Technicians would brave the brutal weather to replace components, only to have the failures resume days later. It was as if the environment itself was hostile to the very concept of connection. The most troubling reports did not concern the loss of signal, but what was found within the noise. Operators began to note a phenomenon. During the deepest lulls, when all scheduled transmissions were silent, the static would sometimes change. The static would sometimes change, forming a carrier wave for whispers. These were not clear sentences, but fragments of speech, half-heard words that seemed to weave in and out of the electronic hiss. The content was unsettlingly personal. Operators reported hearing their own names, spoken in a tone that was neither friendly nor hostile, but simply matter-of-fact, as in a roll call. The final straw came when names were heard over dead channels. These were frequencies that were not in use, or were assigned to stations known to be powered down for the season. Yet, over the speakers, a clear, calm voice would enunciate a name. Sometimes it was the name of a technician on duty. Sometimes it was the name of someone who had served at the relay years prior. The voice was always faint, but perfectly intelligible, emerging from the electronic void with a chilling clarity. The relay station was abandoned in an orderly fashion. The equipment was powered down. The last crew sealed the heavy doors against the drifting snow. And never returned. In the decades since, the relentless weather has done its work. The tower is now half buried in a permanent drift. A sculpture of ice and steel. Its dish forever tilted toward the frozen ground. A stark monument to failed communication. Scientists have theories, of course. They point to the unique geomagnetic conditions of the high latitudes. To plasma interactions in the upper atmosphere that can distort radio waves in strange ways. The whispers could be bleed over from distant broadcasts. Twisted by ionospheric bounce. The names could be a psychological trick. The brain seeking pattern in random noise. Especially under the stressful, isolating conditions of such a post. Of such a post. But the men and women who lived there tell a quieter story. They speak of the deep, ringing silence that exists beyond the wind. A silence so complete it feels like a physical substance. They believe the relay did not fail. Instead, it succeeded too well. Its powerful transmissions did not just travel outward. They also resonated downward, into the ice. And the ice, a frozen archive a mile thick, had something to say back. The whispers in the static are not from the living, but from the landscape. They are the ice remembering the pressure of ancient storms. The groan of continents shifting. The sound of snow falling for 100,000 years. The names are not calls for attention, but acknowledgments. The relay was listening to the earth. And the earth, in its slow, patient way, learned to speak the language of its listeners. It learned the most fundamental unit of human identity, the name. And began to use it. Today, the frostbound relay is silent. No power hums through its cables. No lights break the polar night. It is a frozen sentinel. Yet, if one were to bring a sensitive radio receiver to that site, to tune it across the dead bands, some explorers claim you would still hear it. Not a broadcast, but an echo. A soft hiss that occasionally coalesces into a sigh. Or a single, unmistakable word. It serves as a profound reminder. We build towers to speak across distances. But we rarely consider what might already be speaking in the places we choose. The relay remains, buried in ice, a machine that sought to project the human voice and instead became a conduit for the voice of the deep, frozen earth, a voice that speaks only in whispers. And knows us only by the names we called each other in the dark. The entrance to the Pale Drift tunnels is not marked on any official survey map. It exists in the forgotten geography of a remote, crumbling chalk escarpment, a jagged fissure that seems to breathe out a constant, cool, mineral-scented air. The walls are composed of a soft, pale sedimentary stone, banded in shades of ivory and dove gray. But this beauty is the trap. For the tunnels are not static. They are a system in a state of perpetual, slow-motion flux. The primary characteristic of the Pale Drift tunnels is their subtle, relentless movement. It is not a movement one can see in real time, like a closing iris. It is a movement observed through disorientation. A spelunker might place a distinctive stone or mark a wall with chalk at a junction. Upon returning hours later, after exploring a side passage, they find the marker is gone, or now resides on a completely different wall. The path they took into a chamber is no longer the path that leads out. The tunnels reconfigure themselves with a glacial patience, grinding and settling, opening new capillaries and sealing old thoroughfares. This shifting extends to the very space around an explorer. A corridor that was wide enough for two people to walk abreast can, over the course of a day, begin to narrow. The sensation is not of the walls moving in, but of the space itself being gently compressed. The pale stone seems to swell almost imperceptibly, reducing the gap, softening corners into tighter curves. It is a claustrophobia that builds not from a sudden collapse, but from a gradual, intimate encroachment, as if the mountain is taking a slow, deep breath around you. It is the physiological response, however, that elevates the phenomenon from geological curiosity to profound psychological terror. Individuals who manage their disorientation with calm focus report no physical distress beyond the expected chill and damp. They report a tangible thinning of the air. The more intense the fear, the more pronounced the suffocating sensation becomes. It is a feedback loop of terror, where panic seems to trigger a physical response from the environment. Where panic seems to trigger a physical response from the environment. Where panic seems to trigger a physical response from the environment. This has given rise to the most persistent and unsettling theory about the Pale Drift tunnels. Some who have studied them, and the few seasoned guides who dare to lead limited expeditions, believe the tunnels are not merely a place, but a living entity. They propose that the entire formation is a single, vast, slow organism. The shifting paths are not random, but a form of peristalsis, a digestive motion. The narrowing walls could be a constrictive response, a reaction to the presence of an irritant. And the thinning air for panicked individuals is interpreted not as a psychic event, but as a biological one. In this view, fear emits specific biochemical signals, pheromones of adrenaline and cortisol. The tunnel organism senses this distress, and reacts by absorbing the available oxygen, perhaps as a predatory mechanism to quiet struggling prey, or simply as an immune response to an invasive presence. Scientific counterarguments are robust. Geologists point to the unique composition of the stone, a porous chalk laced with veins of a clay-like mineral. A porous chalk laced with veins of a clay-like mineral that expands and contracts dramatically with changes in humidity. The sensation of thinning air, they argue, is a classic symptom of a panic attack, hyperventilation leading to a false feeling of suffocation. The tunnels, in this analysis, are a natural psychological amplifier, using disorientation and mild claustrophobia to trigger a cascade of very real, but internally generated, physical symptoms. Yet, those who have felt the walls press closer, who have fought for breath in a corridor that seemed to actively resist their passage, often find the purely psychological explanation insufficient. They speak of an intelligence in the pressure, a sentience in the silence that follows a shifted wall. The pale drift tunnels do not simply confuse. They seem to respond. Calm is rewarded with passage. Panic is met with resistance. This behavioral cause and effect suggests a system with a form of awareness, a vast, stony consciousness that measures its visitors by their physiological state. The tunnels remain largely unexplored, their deepest chambers unknown. Modern technology has little advantage here, as laser mapping data becomes obsolete within days. And radio signals fail to penetrate the dense, damp stone. The pale drift tunnels exist as a reminder that the Earth is not always a stable stage for human drama. Sometimes, it is a participant. To enter is to become part of a slow, silent dialogue between the individual and the immovable. You must move with its rhythms, accept its changes, and master your own fear. For the tunnels themselves seem to draw a very clear, very physical line. They allow exploration. But they do not tolerate terror. The air itself holds that verdict, thinning in the lungs of those who cannot accept that they are walking, not through a mountain, but inside a living, breathing, and endlessly patient geology. Perched on a high, wind-scoured ridge in a remote mountain range stands a lonely outpost. It is known as Snowblind Post. Constructed during a brief mineral survey decades ago, it was intended as a temporary base for geologists mapping a network of deep, natural tunnels in the rock below. The location was chosen for its strategic view, not for comfort. It is a place of extreme isolation, where blizzards can rage for weeks. And the endless white of the landscape merges seamlessly with a featureless sky. This environment, a condition known as whiteout, is where the human mind begins to struggle, to seek pattern where none exists. But at Snowblind Post, the hallucinations reported were not random. They were deeply, personally targeted. The work was grueling and monotonous. Teams would descend into the labyrinthine tunnels by day, extracting core samples, and return to the cramped, insulated modules of the post at night. The constant howl of the wind, the blinding reflection of sun on snow, and the profound sensory deprivation began to take a toll. A worker would glance out a frost-rimed porthole and swear they saw a dark figure standing on the ridge. Another would hear their name whispered on the wind, a sound indistinguishable from the gale. These were dismissed as fatigue, tricks of the light and mind. Then the visions became specific. A geologist named Carl, on his 6th week at the post, was checking a seismic sensor array outside. He looked up from his equipment and saw his daughter. She is standing 50 yards away, wearing the yellow dress she had worn on his last day home. She is waving, smiling, beckoning him toward her. He knows, intellectually, that she is thousands of miles away. He took a step forward. Before a colleague grabbed his arm. shouting that he was walking directly toward a concealed crevasse. Carl's experience was not unique. Others reported seeing wives, husbands, parents, or old friends. They would be seen just out of reach, often at the mouth of one of the many survey tunnels that dotted the mountainside. They would call out, not with panic, but with warmth and urgency, gesturing for the observer to follow them into the dark. The visions were compelling, wrapped in a powerful emotional pull of love and longing, a siren song crafted from a person's own deepest attachments. The most tragic accounts are of those who were not stopped. In every case, the sequence was the same. A team member would become quiet, withdrawn, insisting they had just seen someone they knew outside. They would then put on their cold weather gear and walk out into the blinding white. Searches would find their tracks leading, without deviation, to one of the tunnel entrances. The tracks would continue into the dark. And there, they would simply stop. No sign of a struggle, no fallen rock, no body. The tracks would continue into the dark. The tracks would continue into the dark. And there, they would simply stop. No sign of a struggle, no fallen rock, no body. The person would vanish into the deep, cold stone. As if they had finally reached the loved one who called them. And stepped into another world entirely. The post was evacuated and sealed. Official reports cite acute environmental psychosis. A known hazard in polar and high-altitude environments. The brain, deprived of sensory input, begins to generate its own. The specific nature of the hallucinations is attributed to isolation stress. With the mind conjuring its greatest comfort and its greatest vulnerability at the faces of home. But those who survived tell a different story. They speak of a feeling that the mountain itself was aware. That the endless snow and the deep, waiting tunnels formed a kind of predatory landscape. It did not attack with claws or teeth. It attacked with perception. It studied the minds of those who entered its domain, located their most powerful emotional anchor, and used it as a lure. The visions were not random misfires of a lonely brain. They were a calculated, environmental trap. The tunnels were not just geological features. The visions were not random misfires of a lonely brain. They were a digestive system, and the beautiful, heartbreaking visions were the bait. Today, Snowblind Post stands empty, a dark speck against an ocean of white. The wind still screams through its support cables. The tunnel mouths, like dark eyes, stare out from the rock. It serves as a stark warning about the limits of human perception. The greatest dangers in such places are not the cold or the fall. They are the things the mind, in its desperate need for connection, can be persuaded to see. And in that moment of joyful recognition, of believing a loved one has come all this way to find you. The most treacherous step is not into a crevasse, but into the welcoming arms of a perfect, and perfectly deadly, illusion. Glacial Vein Camp was established on a high shelf of ice where the glacier narrowed and slowed, forming a natural platform thought to be stable. From above, the location appeared solid and uniform, a pale expanse stretching toward the horizon. It was chosen for long-term research, far from shifting edges and crevasses, a place believed to be quiet and predictable. At first, everything behaved as expected. Structures were anchored deep into the ice. Power systems ran cleanly. Instruments recorded steady temperatures and slow movement typical of ancient ice. The camp settled into routine, marked by long workdays and silent nights. Then the cracks appeared. They did not form suddenly or violently. Thin lines emerged beneath the surface, branching outward like veins beneath translucent skin. These fractures did not widen as normal stress cracks do. Instead, they curved, rejoined, and spread in looping paths, forming patterns that did not match known glacial behavior. The cracks darkened over time. Light passing through them shifted, bending in strange ways. At certain angles, the ice appeared layered and deep, as if the cracks opened into spaces far below the surface. Team members marked and mapped them, expecting gradual change. Instead, new lines appeared overnight, weaving between older ones with precise alignment. Liquid water began to move within the ice. This alone was troubling. Temperatures remained far below freezing, yet faint motion could be seen along the darker veins. Thin streams pulsed slowly, advancing and retreating without melting surrounding ice. The water did not drip or pool. It flowed sideways, upward, and sometimes paused entirely. Thermal scans showed no heat source. Sensors confirmed the liquid was water, not brine or antifreeze runoff. Samples could not be collected. Whenever drilling approached the moving veins, equipment jammed or failed. Bits dulled instantly. Motors stalled. The sounds began shortly after. At first, it was assumed to be structural noise. Ice shifts, pressure settling, distant cracking. But the rhythm was wrong. The sound was steady, low, and repetitive. A deep thudding echo carried through the ice walls, spaced evenly, never speeding or slowing. It resembled a heartbeat. The sound traveled through tunnels and sleeping quarters, faint but unmistakable during quiet hours. It was not loud enough to alarm at first. Many described it as background noise that demanded attention without urgency. Once noticed, it became impossible to ignore. The heartbeat did not align with machinery cycles or environmental data. Power was shut down briefly to test interference. The sound continued. It was strongest near the deepest storage tunnels, where the ice walls were thickest and the veins most concentrated. Sleep became difficult. Team members reported waking suddenly, unsure why. Some felt the rhythm synchronized with their own pulse. Others experienced a sense of pressure in the chest or ears when standing near the walls. No physical cause was identified. Medical checks showed elevated stress but no injury. The veins continued to spread. They reached closer to the surface, visible beneath flooring panels and through reinforced ice windows. At night, under artificial light, the veins seemed to shift subtly, their dark lines thickening and thinning like something breathing beneath the surface. The camp leader ordered constant monitoring. Data logs show rising tension in daily notes. Language became less technical, more cautious. References to patterns and responses replaced standard measurements. One entry mentions the ice reacting to presence, though no explanation followed. The heartbeat grew louder. Not in volume, but in clarity. Individual thuds became distinct, resonating through metal supports and sleeping bunks. Vibrations could be felt through boots. Standing still made the sensation stronger. Then, one night, the sound changed. It paused. For several seconds, the camp fell into complete silence. No wind. No creaks. No movement. Those awake later described the moment as heavier than noise, a pressure that filled every space. When the heartbeat resumed, it was slower. That was the last complete entry in the camp log. No distress call was sent. No evacuation signal triggered. Equipment remained powered. Meals were left unfinished. Footprints led away from the main structures, but not far. They stopped abruptly near the deepest ice wall, where veins were thickest. Beyond that point, the ice surface was smooth and unmarked. Search teams arrived weeks later. They found the camp intact but silent. The veins were larger, more defined, running through walls and floors in dense networks. Liquid water still moved within them, pulsing slowly. The heartbeat was gone. No bodies were found. No signs of struggle or collapse were present. Structural integrity remained stable. The camp appeared frozen in time, emptied in a single coordinated moment. Environmental data showed no sudden threat. Weather was stable. Ice movement was minimal. Communication systems were functional until the final timestamp. When teams attempted to remain overnight, they experienced intense discomfort. Pressure headaches. Rapid fatigue. A sensation of standing too close to something vast and enclosed. The site was marked unsafe and sealed. Satellite imagery now shows subtle discoloration beneath the ice shelf where the camp once stood. No new camps have been built nearby. Glacial Vein Camp exists now only in records and cautionary briefings. A place where ice behaved like something alive. Where water flowed without heat. Where sound echoed with purpose. And where an entire camp left in silence, as if responding to a signal only they could hear. Perched on a high, barren plateau where the trees have long since given way to lichen and stone, there is a place called Nightfrost Station. Its grey walls blend with the scree and the low sky, making it seem almost a natural formation. By day, it is an austere and lonely place. But it is at night that Nightfrost reveals its true character. The darkness here is unlike any other. Visitors, from maintenance crews to documentary filmmakers, all describe it in the same way. It feels physical. It is not an absence of light, but a presence. It has weight and texture, like cold oil or dense black felt pressing against the skin. This darkness does not retreat from a flashlight beam. It consumes it, shortening the reach of the light and deepening the shadows at the edge of its circle. This leads to the second consistent phenomenon. Artificial lights fail. Not gradually, but instantly. Even chemical light sticks will flicker once and die upon entering the central structures. Generators that have run flawlessly for weeks will cough and fall silent. The station seems to exist in a state of perpetual electrical aversion. Technicians have brought in fully charged, hardened equipment. Only to have it drain in minutes. As if the power is being siphoned away into the walls or the ground beneath. But the most profound effect of Nightfrost Station is psychological. Those who cross its threshold describe an immediate and overwhelming sense of dread. It is not a fear of something specific, like a creature or a person. It is a primordial, gut-level certainty that something is deeply and fundamentally wrong. The air feels thick with a silent, watching malevolence. The dread climbs the spine, tightens the chest, and clouds rational thought with a single, screaming instinct to flee. It is a palpable atmosphere of wrongness that many compare to the moment before a disaster, frozen and prolonged. Because of this, many who are sent to Nightfrost Station refuse to enter more than once. Contractors break their agreements. Researchers abandon their instruments. The experience leaves a psychic residue, a chill in the memory that does not warm. There are no stories of physical attack, no monstrous sightings. The terror is purely environmental, a product of the place itself, and that somehow makes it more inescapable. Geologists have surveyed the plateau, finding unusual magnetic readings. And deposits of certain minerals. That can, in theory, affect both electrical equipment and human brain chemistry. Psychologists point to the power of isolation and suggestion. A perfect storm of sensory deprivation that triggers a primal panic response. The station's design, they note, is inherently oppressive. Which would certainly contribute to a feeling of unease. The lead investigator looks on in horror, his eyes wide with terror. Yet, those who have felt the physical press of the darkness argue that these explanations are insufficient. They believe Nightfrost Station is built upon a fracture, not in the rock, but in something less tangible. A place where the normal boundaries of the world are thin. The darkness is not empty. It is a substance from somewhere else, leaking through. The dread is the human mind perceiving this alien geometry, this incorrectness of space, and reacting with a terror it cannot articulate. The station does not create the feeling. It is merely the architecture that contains it. Another, quieter theory speaks of memory. The plateau has seen epochs of life and death, vast stretches of time where nothing human existed. The station, with its sudden walls and noise, is an irritant to that deep, ancient memory. The dread is the land's own hostility, its immune response to an unwanted presence. The failing lights and the physical dark are its methods of rejection, an attempt to erase the intrusion by restoring the primordial night that belonged to it first. Today, Nightfrost Station stands largely untouched. Its doors are sealed, not by locks, but by unanimous, unspoken agreement. The wind scours its walls. The stars pass coldly overhead. And inside, the darkness rests, not as a void, but as a patient, heavy thing. It knows that its mere presence, its profound and tangible wrongness, is enough. It is a place that reminds us that darkness is not always passive. Sometimes, it is a condition. Sometimes, it is a place. And there are places in this world where we are not welcome. Not by anyone, but by the very nature of the night itself. Cold Hollow Outpost is a silhouette against a relentless white horizon. It was constructed during a brief era of optimistic polar expansion, a modular station meant to facilitate deep ice drilling and atmospheric research. Its life as a functioning base was short-lived. Now, it stands as a forgotten sentinel, its metal hull groaning under the weight of accumulated snow and the constant, sub-zero wind. But the true anomaly of Cold Hollow is not its abandonment. It is the persistent and contradictory sensory experience that awaits anyone who steps inside. The moment the heavy airlock door is breached, the assault is olfactory. A thick, cloying scent fills the frigid air. It is the unmistakable odor of biological decay, of wet rot and forgotten organic matter. This is the first, and most jarring, paradox. The interior temperature of the outpost, while slightly higher than the exterior deadly chill, remains far below freezing. Nothing should decay here. The cold should suspend all such processes, preserving everything in a state of icy stasis. Yet, the smell is pervasive, lingering in the still air like a visible fog. It hints at a process that defies the fundamental laws of this frozen environment. Scientists have been studying the anomalies in the ice for years. But they've never seen anything like this. Something is watching us. The laws of physics no longer apply here. We're not alone in this universe. Moving deeper into the outpost, past the frozen banks of dead computers and the ghostly sleeping quarters, a second paradox becomes apparent. In specific, seemingly random chambers, the ice behaves contrary to its nature. Minor breaches over the decades, allowing wind-driven snow to infiltrate and freeze into thick, opaque sheets on walls and across sections of floor. However, in places like the old mess hall or the entrance to the primary drill core archive, this ice shows signs of perpetual, slight melting. It is not a thaw. The ice remains, but its surface is slick, beaded with moisture, and the edges where it meets the metal wall are softened into gentle curves. Tiny, persistent droplets of meltwater gather at the base, refreezing into delicate, fern-like structures only to melt again. These chambers are no warmer on a thermometer than any other part of the outpost, yet here, the ice concedes to a persistent, unseen heat. These two anomalies converge into the central, unsettling thesis of Cold Hollow. Something within the station retains, or generates, a form of warmth. And that same something is the source of the smell. Evidence of a lingering biological or chemical activity that should have ceased generations ago. Scientific expeditions to study the phenomenon have been inconclusive and fraught with equipment failure. Specimens of the slick ice and samples of the condensed air have shown bizarre microbial activity. Simple organisms operating at temperatures previously thought impossible for such complex biological functions. Some theorize that the original drilling operations at Cold Hollow punctured a deeply buried thermal vent. One that released not just heat, but a unique ecosystem of extremophile bacteria into the lower levels of the station. These organisms, finding a home in the porous insulation and decaying organic matter left behind by the crew, have thrived in a slow-motion cycle of consumption and regrowth. Their life processes generating just enough localized heat to melt the ice immediately around them, and producing the gaseous byproducts of their digestion. But there is a more troubling interpretation, one that speaks to the sensation reported by nearly every person who has spent more than an hour inside the silent halls. They speak of a palpable presence, not a ghost, but a feeling of being in a vast, sleeping body. The decay smell is not from rot, but from a kind of slow, cold respiration. The melting ice is not from geothermal leakage, but from a residual animal heat, the last fading ember of a metabolism that belongs to the outpost itself. In this view, Cold Hollow was not invaded by an organism. It became one. The amalgamation of its materials, its history, the biological matter of its former crew, and the strange pressure of the deep ice has triggered a form of spontaneous, rudimentary life. A station-sized entity in a state of frozen, dreaming decay. This entity, if it exists, is not hostile. It is indifferent, and impossibly slow. The warm chambers are its organs, quietly functioning. The smell is its breath. To walk its corridors is to traverse the interior of a creature that does not know it is alive. A byproduct of human ambition and polar isolation that has stumbled into a new state of being. The drills that once bit into the ice may have been not just tools, but inadvertent seeds, implanting the station with the very spark of the deep earth it sought to study. Cold Hollow Outpost continues its silent vigil. The wind piles snow against its sides, and the stars will overhead in the endless polar night. Inside, the smell persists. The ice melts and refreezes in its dedicated chambers. And something, by any definition we dare to apply, continues to move within. It is a slow pulse in the darkness. A whisper of warmth in a world of cold. A testament to the unsettling truth that life, in all its forms, finds a way to persist. Even when that life is something we never intended to create. Beneath the most desolate and frozen expanse of the Arctic plateau lies a secret that goes straight down. This is the Arctic Maw facility. It is not a natural cave system. It is a construct, a series of vast, concentric tunnels drilled with a precision that defies the era of its presumed creation. Its purpose is unknown, its architects unnamed in any public record. It holds a single, daunting title. It is the deepest known tunnel system created by intelligent hands on Earth. And we have only seen a fraction of it. The entrance is a massive, metal-clad bore set into the bedrock, like a tooth sunk into the skin of the world. The air that exhales from it is several degrees warmer than the surrounding ice, carrying a metallic scent and a profound, vibrating silence. Initial exploratory teams, equipped with the best laser mapping technology, descended to chart its depths. They returned with unsettling news. The maps are incomplete. Not due to technical failure, but because of the facility's design. Tunnels branch at geometrically perfect angles, only to terminate in smooth, curved walls. Only to terminate in smooth, curved walls that scanning suggests are hollow on the other side. That scanning suggests are hollow on the other side. Shafts drop vertically for hundreds of feet before opening into chambers. Before opening into chambers that scramble electromagnetic signals. The layout seems deliberately non-Euclidean, a maze that physically resists being understood. A maze that physically resists being understood. Each new survey reveals new passages that logically should not exist, suggesting the facility is either growing or our perception of it is fundamentally flawed. Within these endless, lit corridors of gray alloy, sound behaves with a sinister clarity. Teams move in tight groups, their own footsteps ringing out in the sterile environment. But often, they are accompanied by another set. The sound of boots on metal grating, echoing from a parallel tunnel 20 feet to the left. Or the clear, unhurried tread of a single walker, following 50 yards behind you down a straight passage that is visibly empty. The footsteps never quicken to catch up, nor do they fade away. They simply match your pace, a perpetual auditory shadow. Radio calls to other teams confirm they are not the source. The footsteps are without origin, a sonic companion that implies you are never truly alone in the depths. This phenomenon leads to the most critical and chilling rule of the Arctic Maw. Never, under any circumstances, enter a tunnel alone. The protocol is absolute, born from tragedy. Early in the exploration, individuals separated from their groups, whether to answer a call of nature, retrieve a dropped tool, or simply driven by a moment of overwhelming curiosity, have met the same fate. They walk around a corner, or into a side chamber, out of sight for mere seconds. When their team rounds the same corner, the corridor is empty. The person has vanished. There are no cries, no signs of a struggle, no hidden openings in the walls. Searches yield nothing. It is as if the facility itself, attentive and patient, waits for a moment of solitary exposure to act. Those who entered alone simply become part of the structure, their footsteps perhaps now adding to the chorus that haunts those who remain. What is the Arctic Maw facility? Theories range from the speculative to the apocalyptic. Some believe it is a relic of a lost, advanced civilization, a shelter from a forgotten cataclysm. Others propose it is a geological research station of unimaginable scale, built to study the Earth's mantle. Skeptics argue it is a Cold War project of monumental secrecy, its true purpose still classified. But the behavior of the place suggests something else. The incomplete maps imply it is an entity that does not wish to be fully known. The phantom footsteps suggest it is aware of its inhabitants, studying their patterns, learning their sounds. The silent, selective disappearance of solitary individuals hints at a method, a predatory patience unique to an environment that is both a place and a mechanism. Perhaps it is not a facility at all in the way we understand. Perhaps it is a trap. A vast, intricate trap built to lure the curious and the brave from the surface. To test them with its impossible geometry. And to quietly, efficiently, absorb those who fail its primary test of the test of never being alone. The Arctic Maw remains, its warm breath melting the permafrost at its rim. It is a space that defies measurement, and a silence that is never truly silent. It is the deepest place we know, and in that depth lies not answers, but an endless, echoing question. A question that follows you with every step you take, mirrored by another set of footsteps just out of sight. In a tunnel that, according to the map, should not be there at all. Last Light Outpost stands where mapped territory ends and uncertainty begins. It was constructed as a final monitoring station, a quiet marker at the edge of known routes. Beyond it, charts dissolve into blank space, and navigation becomes a matter of judgment rather than reference. The outpost was meant to observe, not to invite exploration. From the outside, the structure appears modest. Reinforced walls rise from barren ground. Antennas point toward empty horizons. Supply markings fade under constant wind. It is a place designed for function, not comfort, and for a time, it served its purpose without incident. Then the lights began turning on by themselves. At first, it was dismissed as electrical fluctuation. Power systems in remote regions are sensitive, and brief surges are not uncommon. Yet the pattern persisted. Interior lights activated without scheduled cycles. Hallway strips glowed softly in empty sections. Control panels illuminated even when disconnected from primary power. They did not flicker or fail. They simply turned on, as if someone had entered the room and needed to see. The most troubling feature of Last Light Outpost is the corridor. It begins behind a secured access door near the core of the structure. Records indicate the corridor was part of the original design, intended as a service passage for future expansion. However, no expansion plans were ever approved. The corridor extends straight into the ground, descending at a shallow angle, lined with smooth walls and evenly spaced lights. No one knows where it ends. Initial surveys attempted to map its length. Teams walked for hours without reaching a terminus. Distance markers behaved inconsistently. Measuring equipment disagreed with itself. Some readings suggested the corridor curved subtly, though visually it remained straight. Sound behaves differently inside. Footsteps echo longer than expected, overlapping in ways that make it difficult to tell how far behind or ahead movement has occurred. Voices carry too well, then suddenly not at all. At certain points, even breathing seems muted, as if absorbed by the walls. The lights within the corridor are the same as those that activate on their own elsewhere in the outpost. They remain evenly spaced, casting identical pools of illumination. None have burned out. None show signs of aging. They do not dim with distance, creating the illusion that the corridor never truly recedes. Personnel reported a growing sense of unease the farther they traveled. Not fear exactly, but hesitation. A reluctance to continue paired with curiosity strong enough to override it. Several team members described the feeling of being gently guided forward, not by force, but by expectation. Eventually, exploration was limited. After one team failed to return on schedule, search efforts were launched. The corridor revealed no signs of struggle or obstruction. Footprints continued forward, unbroken. Communication signals weakened rapidly beyond a certain point, dissolving into static that carried faint, rhythmic interference. The missing team was never found. After that, access to the corridor was restricted. Barriers were installed. Monitoring equipment was placed near the entrance. Despite this, the lights beyond the barriers continued to glow, visible through narrow gaps, stretching onward into darkness. Those stationed at Last Light Outpost described nights as the most difficult. When the surrounding land falls into darkness, the outpost becomes a lone beacon. From a distance, its lights stand out sharply against the empty terrain. Sometimes, additional lights appear deeper within the structure, turning on one by one, leading toward the corridor entrance. These activations do not correspond to any schedule. They occur regardless of weather or occupancy. At times, lights activate in rooms that have been sealed for years. Doors remain locked. Nothing inside moves. Several individuals reported hearing faint sounds from the corridor during quiet hours. Not footsteps, but subtle shifts, like distant movement echoing through a long space. The sounds are irregular and brief. They stop when acknowledged, as if awareness alone is enough to silence them. Scientific explanations remain inconclusive. The outpost sits above stable ground with no known cave systems. Structural scans show no deformation or extension beyond planned dimensions. Energy readings fluctuate slightly near the corridor entrance but remain within acceptable limits. Nothing explains the perceived depth or the persistent activation of lights. Local guides refuse to approach the site. They describe the area as a place that draws attention, not by threat, but by promise. They say the outpost does not mark an edge, but a transition. When asked what lies beyond, they offer no details, only caution. Over time, staffing levels were reduced. Rotations shortened. Eventually, Last Light Outpost was placed on automated status, monitored remotely. Physical presence was deemed unnecessary and inefficient. Official statements described the decision as logistical. The lights still turn on. Remote cameras show illuminated corridors in an otherwise dormant facility. Power usage spikes briefly, then stabilizes. No motion is detected. No alerts trigger. The system behaves as if the activity is expected. Satellite imagery reveals a faint glow at night, extending beyond the known footprint of the outpost. Analysts debate whether this is reflection, artifact, or something else entirely. No conclusion has been reached. The corridor remains sealed, its end unknown. Those who have stood at its entrance describe a final sensation before stepping back. A sense that the darkness ahead is not empty. That it is waiting, not passively, but attentively. Last Light Outpost remains where the maps stop. A structure that continues to function without purpose, lighting its own path into a place no one has charted. And the corridor waits, illuminated, leading onward into darkness that has never been measured. Thank you for descending with me into the haunted ice tunnel outposts of Alaska. These places were built to protect the living. But now, they shelter something else. The cold preserves everything. Bodies. Memories. Fear. And perhaps something far worse. If you ever find yourself standing above the frozen ground of Alaska, remember what lies beneath your feet. Endless tunnels. Frozen corridors. And outposts that never truly emptied. Rest well tonight, my friend. Stay warm. And if you ever hear footsteps echoing through the ice behind you, do not turn around.